Hi everyone, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Nicole Edgerton. I'm the Community Manager here in Talent Garden, Dublin. For those of you who don't know, Talent Garden is a European co-working and school hub. Our Dublin campus, which I am in today, is based in Glasnevin, but we have 21 campuses across 8 countries in Europe and a community of over 3,500 members. Today, I am very lucky to be joined by Dr. Shirley Coyle and Frances Mitchell. Shirley is a lecturer in the Department of Electronic and Computer Engineering in DCU. She is also an experienced fashion designer and brings together fashion and engineering to create wearable technology and sustainable design. We are also joined by Frances Mitchell. Frances is the designer of business development for Dolmen Design and Innovation. Frances leads the strategic development of Dolmen as well as all sales, marketing and PR activities. She is an active member of the Irish MedTech Association, where she is a member of the Commercial Working Group and was previously chair in and is currently vice chair, as well as a number of other groups. Previous to Dolmen, Frances was head of program development at the UCD Innovation Academy and is CEO of Crash Ensemble. At the end, we will have time for questions. To ask a question, you can simply write it in the chat or comment section of whatever platform you're watching from, and we will get to them at the end. So to start us off, I'd love to welcome Dr. Shirley Coyle, Assistant Professor in DCU. Hi, Shirley, how are you?
Hi, Nicole. Okay, I was going to share my screen.
No worries, go ahead, take your time.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much, Nicole, for inviting me along to this event. So today I'm going to give an overview of some of the work that I do, the research projects I've been involved in, and talk about what the current trends are and what the future directions are for wearable technology. So as Nicole mentioned, I'm an assistant professor, and I lecture in the School of Electronic Engineering in DCU. And also as part of my role, I'm program chair of a new course in DCU, which is a Bachelor of Science in Global Challenges. And we're really excited about that course because it brings together technology and also social science. So it's a collaboration with the School of Law and Government. Because as an engineer, developing new technologies, it's really important to think about the human factors that are involved. And I think that's very relevant for wearable technologies, but also for the broader context of lots of different types of emerging technologies. As part of my research, I'm also involved in the Insight Centre. So that's a research centre that's funded by Science Foundation Ireland, and it's involved in a lot of different projects, and it takes lots of big data and uses that to empower citizens to create smarter societies by using the data to inform better decision making. So there's a lot of different applications, from environmental analysis to looking at smart cities to make things more efficient. And the area that I'm involved in is in personal sensing. So as Nicole mentioned, my background is in engineering. I actually started off in DCU doing electronic engineering. I spent some time working as a telecoms engineer with Siemens, both in Ireland and in Germany. It wasn't quite what I wanted to do. I always wanted to be a fashion designer. So I started a course in fashion design in the Grafton Academy. So I did that course, which is a 3-year full-time diploma, by night over about 6 or 7 years. And at the same time, during the day, I was still doing engineering. And in engineering then, I started to look into areas that I was more interested in, which was in the biomedical field. So I was very interested in physiology and how technology could be used to improve the quality of people's lives and improve healthcare. So I did a PhD in Maynooth University, and that was in brain-computer interfacing. And at the time, all the brain-computer interfaces used EEG, which is basically electrical signals, to look at brain activity. But my approach used a different approach, used optical techniques or near-infrared spectroscopy, which is like the light that's on your smartwatch, which looks at pulse and the change of the color of blood. So basically, by shining light into the head, I could look at changes in levels of brain activity based on the oxygen levels of blood going to the surface of the brain. So the idea of the brain-computer interface then was to control some kind of computer device as a communication aid for people who were locked in and had no other way of communicating. So it's quite a long time ago that I did this, but here's a picture of the experimental setup that I had. And as you can see, so this was it's quite a large device, not particularly wearable. It was designed on a reclining car seat, so the person would be relaxed lying back. That we tried to minimize movement in order to get the best signal that we could. And one of the things about that in designing that interface between and the support for the sensors that are connected to the skin is something that I've brought with me throughout the years, and that the importance of connecting your sensors really well to the body is something that is often seen as trivial, but that design stage is something that's critical in terms of the type of signal you get. And if you have a good signal to start with, it makes life much easier further down the line when you're trying to do your data processing and analyze your physiological signals. So that was probably 15 to 20 years ago when I did that. And today there's a lot of near-infrared spectroscopy systems that are much more portable, much more flexible. So on the right here's a picture of quite a flexible device that you can put on the forehead. So it monitors cognitive activity. And that's brought about by smaller electronics. So the light sources I used were quite big and bulky, whereas now these are much more flexible and they're much smaller, so they can be integrated into a more wearable device. And then similarly on the left, you have a more portable system. So all the electronics are on the back and a little backpack. And again, the sensors are smaller and a bit lighter so that a person can do sports or yoga or do different tasks while their brain is being imaged to look at the brain function while they're doing those tasks. So when I finished my PhD, I managed to find the perfect job that brought together my interest in textile and clothing with engineering and technology. So I took a research position in the Adaptive Sensors group in DCU, and that's a chemistry-based group. So I was working with a lot of chemists and material scientists, but also working across different disciplines within engineering, and also looking for solutions for the end users. So in the physiology and sports science, and also working with the end users in the clinical field. So one of the projects I worked on was the Biotex project, which was to develop the world's first wearable sweat sensors. And at that stage, people didn't really know much about wearable technology. It was still very new. The technologies that were there were very much based on physical sensors, so looking at accelerometers and temperature sensors. So chemical sensing brings a lot of other challenges because you need to look at actual samples and look at ways of collecting those samples from the body. And sweat analysis can give very useful health information. So the sweat test is still the gold standard for diagnosing cystic fibrosis. So now with the heel prick test, gene mutations can be picked up, but if they do detect that, you're still sent on for a sweat test. So there's a lot of valuable information that you can get about people's health by looking at sweat, and it's a non-invasive method of analysing people's health. So with the sweat test, you generally have to stimulate sweat by using a drug called pilocarpine. But if you're looking at athletes, they're obviously naturally sweating as they're exercising. And for things like endurance sports, like marathon running or cycling, looking at sweat loss, over time is really important to look at levels of hydration. So important for recreational runners in terms of maintaining their safety and ensuring they're not getting dehydrated, but also for elite sports, just even small levels of dehydration can really affect performance. So it could be the cost of a couple of seconds could lose somebody a place in a race at that high elite level of sport. The other thing about sweat is it's very much individual. So some people sweat a lot. Some people have really high levels of salts in their sweat, so they're losing a lot more salt from the body. Other people sweat less, but they might have low concentrations or high concentrations of sweat. So by being able to analyze the amount of sweat lost and the components that are in sweat, you can develop really personalized nutrition plans for athletes and for runners and cyclists in particular. So in the past few years, there's a number of research groups and companies looking at this space. It's a very challenge, as I said, with a chemical sensor, there's a lot more challenges than just a physical accelerometer or temperature sensor, because you have to look at sampling. So you need to bring in microfluidics to collect the sample. You need to have some kind of chemical sensor, which means you need to have a reaction that happens. So you've got a sensing layer and your sample, and then after you have that chemical reaction, there's a waste product. So what do you do with that? And then also to consider, how do you get the signal out? What electronics are you going to use? Wireless communications, and how do you collect that data? Then with the device itself, is it going to be reusable, or is it going to be disposable? And then you've got questions of sustainability then as well. So with all those, so it's very challenging to do even in a lab setting. So to develop it as a consumer product, again, where you want something that's simple to use, is a big challenge. But Gatorade have just this year released a product. So there's a photo on the left here, and it's a patch which has a microfluidic channel in it. So as you sweat, the channel fills up with sweat and it changes color. And then there's an app on the phone that you take a photo of, and it'll give you an idea of your sweat loss and the electrolyte levels in sweat. So the sweat sensing and chemical wearable sensing is one area that I've worked in. Another area that I'm really interested in is developing textiles that are sensors. So I've done a lot of work on textile stretch and pressure sensors. So on the left here, there's an example of some knitted sensors that I've worked on. So these are knit fabrics that have been coated in a type of conducting polymer. So they can conduct electricity, but when you stretch them or relax them, the amount that their characteristics change, and you can measure that relatively simply using an electronic circuit. There's different ways of implementing this. So one solution is to use a knit structure. So as you can see, when you stretch it, the fibers and the threads move apart, so you get less conductance happening in the structure, and then when you release it, you get more contact, and so the electrical characteristics change. You can also develop these now. So more recently, I've used these as printed sensors. So I used carbon inks and screen printed these onto fabric. You can then coat them with an encapsulant so that you're not getting short circuits within your design. And those are based on changes in resistance of the electrical properties of the sensor. It's also a slightly different approach using capacitive sensors, where you've got different layers. So you've got different electrodes, and inside you have an insulating layer. So again, when you stretch it or when you put pressure on it, the electrical properties change in that. So the advantage of these is that they're textile, they're soft, they're comfortable, and much easier to integrate into a garment. And here's some examples of projects that I've worked on using these kinds of sensors. So by putting the stretch sensors across the chest or across the abdomen, you can look at not only breathing rates, but also breathing patterns. So if somebody is taking deep abdominal breaths, or if they're taking really short, stressed breathing patterns. The sensors can be put onto joints, or they can be put onto the spine to look at posture, or in one study we looked at spinal flexion. So this was a study with the rheumatologist, and he wanted to look at early diagnosis of certain conditions where they'd traditionally take a tape measure and measure the spinal extension. But by having a garment, you could actually monitor this at home over time, and try to get early indications that this particular condition was happening. Again, with the same rheumatologist, he was interested in looking at hand movement and looking at stiffness in joints. So often the patients would wake up in the morning and complain of stiffness in their joints, but by the time they get into the clinic, that stiffness had gone. So it was looking for ways to monitor those kind of complaints that the patients had in a non-invasive way in a natural setting at home, and to try and give that extra information to the clinicians. Another project then, so this is a PhD student I'm starting in the next few months, is looking at integrating these types of sensors with augmented reality and virtual reality. So the idea behind this is that you could provide a type of gaming feedback to try to motivate patients who are undergoing stroke rehabilitation, where they might have to do very repetitive exercises, and also looking at things like sports injuries for after knee surgery, where you'd have quite a long recovery period. So to be able to monitor someone's progress, also give them feedback, and also motivate them at the same time. So that's just a quick overview of the kind of projects that I've been working on. When I started in this area, as I said, nobody had really heard of wearables. I guess what's really taken over now is smartwatches, and that's still largely dominating the market at the moment, and probably what most people associate with wearables. So if you look at the trends, the trends in smartwatches is still, it's still forecast to increase over the next few years. The other devices that are coming on the market are smart rings. So you have some of the same kind of functionalities as a smartwatch. So for example, the Oura ring, where you can monitor the pulse, you can monitor movement, look at sleep, and some of these have been used in studies to monitor COVID and to look at people's health. Another big area in wearables is the concept of hearables, and there's lots of different applications, but the main two are either in developing headphones that can monitor things like pulse. So say for sports headphones that can also monitor your heart rate and then link up with your phone. The other area in hearables then is smart hearing aids. So with this device here by Starkey, the Livio AI, it actually acts as a virtual assistant. It can also detect falls. So if you have an elderly person wearing this, it also looks at their social interactions, looks at how many conversations they might have had. And so another way of monitoring and doing it in a non-invasive way on a device that people are already using. Another area, there's some work in smart wearables in shoes. And one of the first wearables I came across was this Nike Plus, which is a very simple accelerometer that you put into the insole of the certain Nike shoes, and that connects to your iPod. But the design of that, even though it was quite simple, but it was so effective in gathering so much information about runners all over the world, and creating communities in terms of collecting the wearable device and generating big data from wearables. So looking to the future, all those devices were really based on existing kind of rigid electronics that people are already using. I think the future is going to be driven by new materials, the advances in new manufacturing methods. So it's going to develop, you're going to develop wearables that are much more flexible, devices that conform to the body much more easily. And also moving away from the physical sensors to more chemical sensors, so looking at sweat and other types of body fluids, so maybe saliva, tears, and being able to do that in an unobtrusive way and an accurate way. So one direction is in skin patches. So again, developing flexible electronics. There's an example here from La Roche-Posay where they have a patch which changes color depending on the UV exposure. And again, that's linked to an app on the phone. There's other wearable patches that look at things like ECG and EMG, the biochemical sensors looking at interstitial fluid or sweat levels. And then moving on from skin patches, going a step further than that to even more flexible, thin devices. You're talking about electronic skin, where you could actually, detect pressure changes and look at sense of touch and the levels of pressure on the skin. Really exciting area of research for prosthetics to give feedback from prosthetic limbs, and also in robotics is going to be another big area. So in putting these sensors, into onto the body, obviously power is an issue. So here's one concept that was developed by Google with the contact lens. So this has a chip and an antenna built into it, where the antenna receives power. So it's powered by the radio wave, and the sensor is all built into this flexible contact lens. Another similar concept are tooth-mounted sensors. So here's a study from Tufts University where, again, they have a sensor device attached to an RFID chip with the antenna, and they can look at things like the acidity of saliva. There's potential to look at things like cortisol, linked to stress levels in saliva. But done in a way that you don't need the electronics on the device itself. And also miniaturized electronics, flexible, that can be put into places like the eye or onto the teeth. The area that I'm particularly interested in is in smart garments and improving the way electronics can be integrated into textiles. So making the textile itself the sensor, whether that's from the fiber level or right through to the finished garment, and looking at ways to interconnect those sensors together. So as you can see, there's there's so many ideas in wearables now, and there's huge benefits to improve healthcare and improve people's well-being and promote an active lifestyle and healthy lifestyles. I think what's really important, initially, your questions come up about washability and sustainability, and I think at the start it was like, okay, let's just get it working. But I think now we really need to think about the ethical and sustainable design of this new technology, and to use that as we design new materials and develop new devices. And as part of that, we need to think about the ethics of the data that we're collecting, and also consider obviously privacy and security issues. And that involves working across disciplines. So working with experts in computer science, and also working with broader number of disciplines. Another important factor then is the sustainability, and looking at new materials and making sure that they can be recycled, that they're biodegradable, and also look into energy harvesting. So with all these new devices, we need to think about how we're going to power these. And with the body moving, there's lots of potential there to be able to power them in a renewable way. So that's just a brief overview. Thanks very much, and I'm looking forward to questions. My email address is there if anybody wants to contact me.
Great, thank you so much, Shirley, for those amazing insights. It's really great to hear about your work and what we can expect in the future of health tech and in wearable sensors here. Now I would love to welcome Frances Mitchell from Dolmen Design, who will present a case study of the work that Dolmen carried out for Coroflo, an award-winning and successful startup in the area of wearable tech and women and children's health. Thank you so much for joining us, Frances.
No worries. I don't know why. Is that flashing? I'll try and share again. I don't know why that's doing. Technology. Right, that's up there now. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. Right, so thanks very much for the opportunity to speak. So yes, I will talk about Caraflo, which is an amazing story. But in the first instance, I just wanted to give a bit of background on who Dolmen are, because we're a design agency, and why does design matter in the context of wearable technology, especially around people's adoption of owning their own health through wearable tech. So Dolmen are a design agency that have been based in Dublin for the last 30 years. I guess we would pride ourselves on being award-winning and IP rich in the work that we do. We would work across a number of different industries. So not just in healthcare, we actually work in fast-moving consumer goods, in pure industrial design, more B2B work. But with all of this advent of smart technology and coming in on all the different sensors that Shirley was speaking about there. We can see a lot of convergence between especially medical and consumer goods, where in the medical sphere, you can see even clinicians kind of expecting a consumer product level of interaction with the products that they're using. There's connected health things going on, in terms of keeping people at home, which is where wearable tech is really exciting too. Preventative healthcare as opposed to dealing with health issues as they happen. But another thing where Dolmen is very strong is that creative and technical combination. So it's not just a bunch of people who make things look good. We dig quite deep into the work that we do, and we generate a lot of patents for our clients. And it means that we work across boundaries with our clients in new product development and marketing. So the new product development teams, R&D teams, would tend to build those proof of concept principles. They get something working. And Shirley was saying, you get technology working. So that fundamentally something works, and then you have to evolve it into a product that can work in the marketplace. The marketing side of things really brings in an awful lot of the user insights. And I'm going to talk a bit about the process of design and how it's important for keeping the person at the center of everything that we do. It's just a snapshot of our team. But as I said, we've been working at this for a long time. So we would work with multinationals, we would work with SMEs, and we work with startups. And I guess in the main, the most exciting stories come from startups and research. So we do a lot of research projects as well with Europe and different universities. But it's all tied to the process. And the process is really important in design, in getting the design right, so that when you have a concept or an idea or a problem to solve, that you approach it in a strong and robust way. That means you're more likely to succeed in the marketplace. So when we are doing work in Dolmen, we would look at early stage discovery processes, which I'm going to dig a bit more deeper into. Development is pure CAD development, prototyping and testing. So we do all of that good work there too. And we get to the point of manufacture. So we can help startups source their supply chain. We can do all the design for manufacturing assembly, all of that work that needs to be done, the detailing, to make sure that the product is produced as designed. But how we do what we do is informed by a lot of great global theories. In the main, the Stanford Biodesign process, which I'm going to talk to in a bit more detail. But a lot of other great theories out there, like Mastering Lean Product Development by Ron Mascatelli, people like that. And how we do what we do has actually been integrated into a new ISO in innovation management, ISO 56002, that our founder led the development of over the last 10 years. Well, why am I talking about all of this? I think it's important when you're designing something that is to be worn, that you understand where it's going, the environment it's going into, and the people it's going to be used for. So that's where design is really, really important in the development process of a product, especially in wearables, because you're asking people to do something quite different. And so therefore you have to understand where they're going to be. You understand the people as they are. If you're looking at people with chronic illness, for instance, you want to integrate wearables into their lives. How do they work? Are their hands as dexterous as the next person? Can they hear properly? What are the best ways to give them information based on the data that's being gathered through the wearable? All of these kinds of things need to be uncovered and discovered. So this is where you go into a discovery process. So if any of you have ever come across design thinking, you'll know, the IDEO hexagonal approach to layout of design thinking. And we would just have added a bit to it because it's so important in the beginning to build that team structure and also ultimately at the end define a business case. But how it works is basically you've got a concept, you've got an idea, you have a problem worth solving, but how are you going to do that? So you build your team, and generally it's a mixed discipline team, especially in healthcare where you've got medics if required, or certainly people of a clinical background, engineers, business people. And you combine all the different expertises to start building out the project and getting to the nub of the issue. And this is where you're out and you're talking to people and you're gathering data. Top line, what you're doing here is voice of the customer research. And you've already identified by this stage who your target markets are. So you'll know the demographics of the people you're looking at. In the case of healthcare, what kind of health focus area are you looking at, what geographies in the world you're looking at, and you want to go out and you want to observe, gather data, interview in a qualitative nature, and really dig deep for those insights, real insights from the field that will drive how you evolve and grow these products. I say there, avoid the granny trap approval. This is mainly when startups can sometimes come, thankfully a lot less now. Most people are a lot more well informed, but when someone has an idea and they and their granny think it's a great idea, it does not necessarily mean it's a good idea. This is the importance of voice of the customer research. You're going out and you're talking to the actual people who will be using this product. Once you've gathered all that data, you would define the needs and outcomes. And I guess in terms of medical and the big thing that comes out of the Stanford by design process is what are the need statements? There's a lot of work done around need statements to really qualify what is the right need to be addressing with the solution. And this is also to help you develop a solution that is going to have impact. But also in the context of medical device development, you need to make sure that you're developing something because once you get to a design lock-in, you're really locked in because it's a regulatory process. It's very, very difficult to make changes at a later stage. So you want to be as confident as possible in the early stages of development that you've got your product right. And so this is where this stage is really, really important. And then you would do an ideation session. So this is the fun part where you get everybody in the room, you get the mixed discipline teams in the room, ideally you get end users in the room, and we would have a designer per team, and we're pushing people through different creative experiences and challenges to visualize solutions in quite an intense way. And you get volumes and volumes of ideas at this point. A lot of it can be sent to your legal teams for IP protection. But a lot of that is early stage sketching, which you would then bring back and validate with end users. So again, you're pushing to mitigate risk by validating early. And this is really, really important. And so you can do this quite simply because you just do a set of sketches, worked up sketches so that people can understand what it is you're trying to achieve. You can even go to animations if you want. Some people prefer to go to even early stage prototypes at this stage if, say, form and function are required, are a big element of the development of the product. But it's also an iterative cycle. So once you've visualized and validated with end users, you're going to have a lot of insights. Do you go back and redo more work on the development of those concepts and validate again? Quite possibly. And sometimes this can happen when you have a very early stage concept and you want to push it through to commercialization. You learn things along the way. But ultimately what you want out of this is the business case. Once you've validated all of your concepts, you've gotten insights from the market. What is your business case and does it make sense to bring it to market? So in the context of this story here that I'm going to speak about in the main, I have a second one in my back pocket if I need to, is the story of Caraflo. So Caraflo are a really cool company, Irish company, startup, currently based in DCU Alpha now. They weren't always based there. And basically it came from two founders, a husband and a wife team. So wife was a GP, husband was an electronic engineer. And they had, their first child was born full term, but low weight. And they wanted to breastfeed, but they were obviously very concerned about ensuring that the child would have sufficient milk. And obviously she was, the mother was asking the nurses, how do I know how much milk my child is getting? And they were like, well, you weigh your child, you feed your child, and then you weigh your child and you hope for the best. So not very reassuring and very inaccurate as obviously as a way to do things. And when you're anxiously trying to ensure that your very low weight child is getting enough milk, it can be quite stressful when you're breastfeeding, because breastfeeding, you just don't know how much milk is going in. When at least you're bottle feeding, you can see based on how much is put into the bottle and how much is at the end of the bottle, you know how much milk your child has gotten. But you want to breastfeed because breast milk has so much better nutrients for your child. So they went on a mission to see what they could do. So the husband was an electronic engineer and he had worked on a kind of a microfluidic flow solution in a previous job. And he knew there was something that could be done. And there's a thing that exists for a long, long time called a breast shield. I was looking on their website, it was actually in the 1500s, they even found examples of breast shields, which basically sometimes breastfeeding can be quite aggressive for mothers and quite painful. And so they would use an element of protection between the breast and the child to ensure that the milk still flows, but that the mother isn't too damaged by the whole experience. So these are pre-existing, that they exist already on the market. And what these guys did was take a flow sensor and integrate it into a basic breast shield and proved their principle. So this was a really important stage of proving the principle. They knew this would work. If they could get this breast shield to work in a more refined way, it would be a product, but fundamentally they were able to quantify the flow of milk at the point of feeding, which is first to world, absolutely, in terms of this product. So it's a really cool product. But obviously this was a very basic mock-up, so they needed to develop it into a consumer product. So this is something that you would either buy in a pharmacy or you could buy in mother care. So it's something that has to work in both those contexts. And then you have to think about when you're going to manufacture these things at scale, how are you going to make sure that it is designed an inch of its life, basically, to make sure that when the product lands on the mother, it is exactly as it needs to be, really comfortable, and in fact, almost like it's not there. Because you want to just have as much contact between the mother and baby as you can. And so we came on board, we worked on different concepts for the form of the breast shield. So that's how the heart-shaped form came about, which is really beautiful. And then we're looking at the charging dock, how it's going to be cleaned, how the electronics get integrated, and even the branding and packaging in this context. So you're thinking about how does this fit into the life of a mother? And so this was something I was obviously very invested in because I actually had a premature child myself. He was born 2 months premature. So I knew all about low weight babies and the stresses of being a new mother and all that involves. So you're fitting a new piece of technology into the life of someone who's sleep deprived and kind of stressed. So how do you make this into a product that reassures them? The nice thing about this is anytime I speak to anyone who's had a new child recently, they're like, where can I buy it? It's such an amazing solution. And it is. And obviously the pandemic delayed them somewhat, but they've gotten significant funding. So we did a lot of this early stage work, and then they went to the EU and got 2.1 million from the EU EIC Accelerator. Richard Branson had heard about them at a pitching event and wrote about them in a book. So that obviously helped them as well. So they're doing extremely well. And they're doing an awful lot of trials and tests and research in the area of leveraging this technology to help boost breastfeeding in general around Europe. So, and the world, I guess, as well. So they're hoping to launch, I was talking to the CEO yesterday, they're hoping they should be in market by early next year, so January next year. But it's great to see this kind of development is hugely important. This is really where mothers are taking a bit more control and where you can leverage technology to solve a problem and reassure mothers. It's not something that mothers will wear all the time, but just for those points in time where they're worried about their child, they can use this, be reassured, and know that their child is getting the milk that they need. Because it's a scary time having a new child. So that is the story of Caraflo. They're doing extremely well. I could tell another story, but what I'll do for the moment is pop out of my presentation. And I think we're approximately at time for Q&A.
Hi, Francis. Yes, I see we have questions that has come in. It might be for Shirley. So what do you think is going to happen with commercial wearables like the Apple Watch?
So potentially including
non-invasive CGM technology.
So continuous glucose monitoring. So I think glucose monitoring there's a lot of companies looking at that at the moment, and obviously it's come along a huge way. It's an area I'm not I don't do a huge amount in glucose monitoring, so I don't know exactly about it. I think one possible solution is if you think about, smartwatches and smartphones, that the NFC tag, you tap things. So maybe if there's kind of skin patches or, tags somewhere that you could just tap the watch to it, might be one way of doing it. I don't know, Francis, have you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, and glucose monitoring, actually, I've been speaking to some groups. There's work around phones and actual phone cases where you would use the phone case as a sampler for the blood to be monitoring your blood glucose levels. So there was some interesting work around that. But it's really complex because obviously you now have wearable devices that are not watches that you can constantly monitor your glucose levels anyway. They exist. So it's just, there's so many different ways to manage that. I'm sure you just need to keep an eye on the patents that are being logged by Apple and by Google in these areas to see where their interest lies. But obviously diabetes care is massive.
I think, sorry, I was going to say, and blood pressure monitoring I think is of huge interest. So that's kind of the next, and it's useful for so many different medical purposes.
Yeah, we're working on a number of projects in that area that I'm not going to talk about. But yes, it's all wearable, home kind of preventative care. So the good thing about wearables, I think, is using and leveraging the sensing technologies that are out there to prevent things. So you can see it with cardiac care, obviously, and I'm sure you're doing loads of work on it. But even a lot of work, and we're talking to a lot of physiotherapists around preventing muscle issues, especially in professional sports people, because there's a lot of early stage indicators around real issues with muscles that you can capture early on and deal with, but you need to be able to capture that early on. So there's cool stuff on there too.
Yeah, I see they said that it is happening already. So I think, yeah, it's definitely something that's popular. I think while we let people kind of come in with more questions or comments. Francis, you said you had another case study at the tip of your tongue. Do you want to let us know? Now I'm intrigued to know what you want to talk about.
Well, it was the other product. I can talk about it without showing anything as well. It was just Mucol. It's a product that we designed a number of years ago, but it was another great kind of innovation coming out of Ireland, which is a wearable sensor for cows that allows the cow to text a farmer when a calf is arriving. So it was a different type of wearable technology, not necessarily human based. But the reason I thought it might be interesting is just literally talking to a client this morning about how technology and the importance of technology and how the data and how it's being processed is shifting and changing. So previously everything was happening in the cloud, but now seemingly everything is being pushed to the edge. So the point of where things are happening. So therefore, different levels of technology are going to have to be integrated into these solutions. And so how are you going to do that? So we end up doing a lot of work in that area. But for instance, these cows can end up in very remote locations. They just have to be able to, the device needs to be able to quantify an algorithm of movement of tail in and of itself, and that should trigger a text message. So you just need to be able to get that information out. But this client I was speaking to, he was saying, like, because we've done a lot of work with them on high tech, real high value technology solutions, but in extreme locations. So therefore everything is integrated. So they've long been at the edge of technology. And now there's a lot more companies coming to talk to them to learn about their experiences in integrating it and making it more robust for real life, things like that. So
great. No, that sounds amazing. And yeah, just in relation to Coroflo, it does sound like a really amazing product that I think is definitely overdue, that you said yourself. So thank you for sharing that with us as well. Actually, another question has come in here. Margot has asked, what about subdermal micro devices with more accuracy? I don't know who wants to jump on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think as the technology's being developed and miniaturized, it's easier to integrate things under the skin. So I think that will definitely, and accuracy is something. I think that's the thing with a lot of, say, the blood pressure monitors, that there are a lot of people working in that space, but getting them approved as proper medical devices is a challenge, and accuracy, getting adequate accuracy is a challenge. So yeah, something that people are working on, and it will happen in the future. Yeah.
I guess there's loads of different ways. I mean, if you're going into the body, it's less wearable. It's more in your body. There's like the smart gastro pills you can take to help diagnose what's going on in your gastrointestinal tract and stuff like that. And I know there was a guy, an Irish guy. Well, there was a big thing. I think Microsoft in one of their European offices had subdermal trackers in a lot of their staff to go into the office. But there was a guy, what's his name? Dennis, I can't remember. He used to work, he's down in Cork. I can't remember what company he works for now, but he gave himself a subdermal sensor thing to track his life, actually. So
oh, wow. Well, we have Fitbits and Apple Watches, I feel, to do that.
Take it off,
everything that's going on. Yeah, you can take them off. I don't see any more questions come in, but just in relation to creating products, like, what do you think is probably the most unexpected challenge? Because even stuff like inaccuracies, I would have never thought about that. Is there something that you find particularly challenging in these design processes?
Question for me or for Shirley?
Both of you.
Okay. Shirley, you want to go first?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, but I mean, as Francis said, I mean, I think involving the end users from the start is the most important things, and testing things early, because like I remember with the sweat sensors, we thought we had this brilliant device. We went, set up the bike, and then within a few seconds, it's like, okay, this doesn't work. And something happens that you just hadn't thought about. So just trying it out, testing things out quickly, rather than going, oh, look, I have this perfect thing, and then you go and test it. So I think.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting thing, especially when you've trained as an engineer, you're like, problem solution. There you go. It is. And I've trained as an engineer, but it's so iterative, the development of products, because you can't know everything. And the real world is messy, and people even messier. And so when you want people to use technology, that's the biggest challenge, and to use it effectively and efficiently. Like, you can see massive issues around drug program adherence, for instance. So getting people to take drugs when they should to save their lives, they don't even do it because of human behavior issues. They'd be told, take this drug 3 times a day at this time for the next month, and it will save your life, or you might die. And they're not necessarily going to do it. So it's really interesting when you observe these things. But even down to like, there's a really cool startup, Aaron Hannon out of Galway, and he's developing a cap to help people not lose their hair during chemotherapy. And he had discovered, he's a young guy, he's only 19, he's amazing, or 20. Anyway, he keeps winning awards. But when people get a cancer diagnosis, one of the first things they ask isn't how long am I going to live, it's am I going to lose my hair? And because the chemotherapy going through your system shacks your hair and your hair leaves, and there's these current things called cold caps that you can put on your head during chemo, but they're extremely painful. And so we've been working with him to develop a new way of doing that. Really complex, because you're trying to develop a wearable that works, is effective and not uncomfortable. So oftentimes there's loads of really complex challenges that have to be overcome, and then you have to layer on the human and then the behavior and all that kind of stuff. So as you were talking about that, even with the positioning of all your sensors, Shirley, it can move, or people can do things differently. People are the worst.
I don't see any more questions come in. But if in the next minute or two, if any more come in, we will get to them. But I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We have a few more events coming up in the future that I would like to talk about. So tomorrow, for our Talent Garden members, we have a brilliant Tigers Connect. This is about scaling in startups. So this will be a facilitated networking session on the beauty of keeping your business model simple, a great opportunity to connect with others in a diverse global community. And if you're not a member, don't worry, we didn't forget about you. We are hosting an open day here in Talent Garden, Dublin on July 13th. So keep your eyes peeled for more information on this. Thank you so much, Frances and Shirley, for joining me today. This was really insightful. I've learned a lot myself, and we will send everyone your contacts so they can get in touch with you if they have any more questions.
Great. Thanks very much, Nicole.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.